Rob, and then onto the Super Rugby semis. So the Crusaders overcoming the Chiefs without too much trouble. But what about that Lions second half comeback against the Hurricanes and hosting a final, Super Rugby final? I believe it's the first time a South African side has hosted a final since the Bulls did it.
Since the Bulls, yeah.
But what do they need to do to string two halves together like that against the Crusaders, and what kind of an opponent do the Crusaders pose? Like, how different are they in the challenge that they bring?
Yeah, they'll be. They're a more structured sort of team than the Hurricanes. The Hurricanes like to play this kind of fast, fluid, sort of total rugby, running the ball from sort of crazy angles, crazy positions on the field, backing themselves to score tries, and they're lovely to watch. But you know what? They were actually their own worst enemies in Johannesburg. They threw the ball around in such sort of lusty sort of basketball fashion, if you like, in that first half. Even as they opened up a huge...
called it the fancy stuff.
The fancy stuff, yeah. They opened up a 22-3 lead, which you've got to say was pretty formidable. And the Lions looked a little bit sort of punch drunk for a while. But that was deceptive because we know that these Lions have got some pretty stern metal. And they are very good at sort of managing to reorganize themselves. If they do get into a bit of a pickle in a match, as you rightly say, they haven't yet produced a proper sort of 80-minute performance in the knockouts. Remember that Sharks game? They were very flaky for varying periods of that match. And then come the semi, of course, going behind by that margin. A lot of people sort of thought, that the Hurricane stampede was on and that it could be a really gory defeat for a South African team. But the way they came back was absolutely tremendous. I mean, they from that 22-3 position, they of course scored that important try through Jacques van Rooyen, the sort of the barreling loose head prop just before half time that I think infused a fresh sense of hope and optimism into the Lions ranks. They went into half time just 12 points down, which does give you that sort of sniff. And I always felt that if the Lions could then sort of score first in the in the second half, which they did, then they were right back in the picture. And you could see that the Hurricanes were thinking, goodness, we've actually run out of a bit of puff here. We've gone too fast, too quickly, and they got a bit of a speed wobble.
Rob, tends to happen to visiting teams as well in the high fault. The way say the last 10-15 minutes, they suddenly run out of steam.
Yeah, let's not forget that the Hurricanes had also travelled again long distance, right at the business end of the season, when you kind of think, you like to think that most of your long distance travel is out of the way. So coming back across the Indian Ocean, we know that teams have a dreadful record in terms of having to go across the ocean to play, whether it's a final or just one of the earlier knockout matches. You just don't win, and so it proved in the end. That second half performance really showed that the Lions are capable of going absolutely toe-to-toe with the Crusaders. I think if they're properly switched on from the opening minute, if they can get their defensive structure properly settled early and not sort of get run ragged and not play too much sort of rugby themselves, perhaps in the really early periods. Make sure they build a little bit of quiet sort of scoreboard pressure through penalties and the like, get some positional traction. But there's enough quality in that Lions outfit on the bench as well to, I think, give the Crusaders a serious run for their money. I see that some bookies have actually got the Crusaders installed as slight favourites, which I think is brave because no team has yet crossed continents to win Super Rugby. I think it's slight advantage Lions, and I say that without any sort of parochial feeling. I genuinely think that it's going to be tough for the Crusaders to come here. But if one side can do it, then maybe it's the 7-time champions. So I mean, we're set for I think a really fantastic showpiece.
And do you think we'll finally sell out stadium this season?
I hope so. I mean, that crowd was, I think, officially given at just under 28,000, if memory serves me correctly, for a semi, which was pretty disappointing, really. I can only assume that in hard-pressed...
Better than what the Aussies and Kiwis have dished up.
Absolutely.
Crowd attendance.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that, derbies have lost a little bit of their luster. Everyone said that there was this great relish for derbies. I think that argument's running a little bit thin. We saw that for the Crusaders-Chiefs semi-final as well. The crowd wasn't quite as big as you might have expected it to be. But 28,000, that means that Ellis Park is really not much more than half full, which was a little bit of a concern for the semi. But I've got to say that there were some immediate signs of people already queuing after the semi-final for their tickets for the final. And I think the people who are absent riskily decided to save their money, and now they'll give the big push. And a full house at Ellis Park, as we know, is a formidable happening. It's a formidable ground anyway. Yeah, you might perhaps one of the airlines will make a plan. Maybe you'll get a 737 doing a little buzz over the ground. But because we know that that's usually a bit of a good omen for a South African win. But I must say I have a pretty good feeling for the Lions for this match.
Exciting times. All right, thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Nick.